All right, this video is just going to be a bit of a run through about how to answer some tricky common access resource questions. So firstly, this is a question that I sort of found tricky when I looked at it. Explain how common access resources are different from other factors of production used by a business. So the key features of common access resources that make them different to normal resources is that nobody has property rights over them. So common access resources are non-excludable, and nobody has property. So because of the absence of property rights. So resources like land and capital are generally owned by a specific person, and that person chooses how they are used to make goods and services. The thing with common access resources, so we're talking about common access resources used in the production process, they're available to everyone and people can access them without paying. So really this question, while it looks tricky, is just talking about that non-excludability of common access resources. Everyone has access to them, unlike normal labour and capital. Explain with reference to their two key features the difference between public goods and common access resources. Public goods are non-excludable, meaning anyone is able to use a public good without paying, and non-rivalrous, in that the use of them by one person does not affect another person's usage. Common access resources are non-excludable, sorry. Therefore anyone can use them even though they've not paid for them. So common access resources share that feature. However, unlike public goods, they are rivalrous in that consumption by one person reduces the quality or quantity of resources available for others. E.g., overfishing, for example, leads to significantly less fish available for future generations. You'll notice in your book I've used this as a 3-mark question. What I would encourage you to add to that question for a 3-marker is that unlike public goods, common access resources, there's too many resources allocated towards common access resources, and there's an overuse of common access resources, whereas public goods are not provided in a free market because you can't generate a profit. So just be mindful of the distinction there. Common access resources overused because of an absence of property rights and the non-excludability. Public goods are not provided by a free market. Explain the link between common access resources and negative externalities. The production and consumption of goods and services that impose negative externalities on third parties often lead to a reduction in common access resources for future generations. So when we consume goods and services with a negative externality, that leads to the absence of or less access to common access resources in the future. For example, production which leads to excessive pollution can have third-party costs in the form of poorer air quality for future generations and potential health problems for third parties. The negative externality leads to a reduction in the quality of air, the common access resource, for future generations. Please ignore the 5 minutes of no talking, 5 seconds. Fourth question. Choose one example of a common access resource and explain why the market system tends to overconsume common access resources. So fish in the ocean are an example of a common access resource. Make sure you say in the ocean, because if they're privately owned, then technically they're not. A common access resource is one that is non-excludable, therefore anyone can use the good and rivalrous in the sense that the use of a common access resource by one person will reduce the amount available to another. So 1 mark for identifying your common access resource and explaining what they are. Due to the non-excludability of public goods, and this should say common access resources, and the absence of price signals, it is in everyone's own interest to overconsume these goods to enhance their own material living standards, e.g. increased access to fish for families. So that should say common access resources. But because they're non-excludable and the absence of price signals, e.g. they don't cost you any money, everyone has an incentive to overconsume these goods and services. People are unlikely to consider the potential third-party costs of overconsumption on future generations and others users of the common access resource. As they are rivalrous, consumers also know that if they don't get in quick, others will consume them instead. So that also leads to the overconsumption, is this idea that no one has the incentive to reduce their consumption. Identify and explain one form of government intervention that has been or could be utilised to reduce the excessive consumption of a common access resource. The ozone layer is an example of a common access resource. It is non-excludable in that it protects all humans from UV rays, and rivalrous in the sense that human activity is creating a hole in the ozone layer which is unrepairable. The government is therefore intervening through laws banning substances like chlorofluorocarbon or CFCs that affect the ozone layer, a CAR. The aim of these laws is to ensure everyone is doing their part to protect the ozone layer so that it's protected for future generations. Other one you could use would be something like an excise tax. because you could talk about how that internalizes the costs of climate change and therefore protects the common access resource, which is a stable climate. Explain why market failures caused by common access resources may require international cooperation to achieve a socially optimal outcome. Many common access resources require international cooperation because it's the actions of everyone on Earth that is depleting that common access resource. So again, if you're looking at climate change, it's the actions of everyone on Earth that is contributing to a warming of the globe. Climate change, for example, could lead to a lack of stable weather patterns, which is a common access resource shared by everyone. Remember that the common access resource is the stable weather. The common access resource is kind of like the good thing that is shared by everyone and no one has rights over it. The excessive release of carbon emissions as a result of both production and consumption of various goods and services is leading to a build-up of greenhouse gas emissions, which are contributing to the heat of the atmosphere. Without a worldwide commitment to reduce emissions through perhaps a cap and trade system, so for example when you get a certain amount of permits and you can trade them to pollute, or through taxes and subsidies to incentivise renewable energy, they will not be able to enjoy the stable climates that we have been able to enjoy in the past. One or two countries reducing their emissions will not be sufficient. We need a global commitment to reducing carbon emissions. Thank you.